With ModelRisk, you can run multiple simulations on the same model to test out different possible decision options. The principle works like this. You start with a model and you construct the model so that the logic will allow you to run the model using these different decision options. So, for example, you may have 3 different scenarios you want to run. Numbers 1 to 3, and perhaps there are going to be 3 different types of contract that you would have. And then you run the model under these 3 different types of contract and see which one would likely be the most favorable. So to do that, what we do is we first of all put the decision parameters of the first scenario into the model, run it, and see what the results look like. In this case, the net present value. Then we run the second scenario and see what those results look like. And then finally, the third scenario. And by overlaying all these 3 scenario results together, we can determine which one is likely to be the best for our particular purposes. So for example, the results here show that at the 95th percentile, the option number 1 gives you $26 million of return. Option number 2 gives you $18 million, and option number 3 gives you $13 million, with similar probabilities of having a negative NPV. To illustrate what this looks like, we have a function here, an output, and the output is called simulation number times 1,000 plus sample number, and that's what it's producing. It's a function which takes the current simulation value, multiplies it by 1,000, and adds the current sample value. If I go into the simulation settings for this model, I use 1,000 samples and 4 simulations and run this model, then what I should get is for simulation number 1, we're writing 1 here, plus the values in the sample running from 1 to 1,000. So I'll get 1,001, 1,002, up to 2,000, and then so on for each of the simulations. Let's just run the model and see how that works. Start. You see the simulation progress bar will tell me how many samples and how many simulations I've run. Second simulation, third simulation, fourth simulation. When it's finished, the results here comes up. And let's look at the first example. This is a cumulative distribution of each of the 4 simulations for that variable simulation number times 1,000 per sample. And you can see it's a uniform distribution because these lines are straight. So it's picking up the value 1,001 up to 2,000, 2,001 up to 3,000, etc. for each of those 4 simulations. If I show the legend, you can see each of these simulation runs in its turn. This is just a technical example to show how the simulations are run one after the other. In the real world, when we build simulation models that have multiple simulations, we use a couple of different techniques. So I'm illustrating those 2 techniques here. Here we have simulation number 0. In other words, it's not running a simulation, 1, 2, 3, 4, and the values that we want to use when we're running each of those simulations. And then which of these numbers is going to be selected? We are simply using a VLOOKUP function. So we're looking up the value of the current simulation in this table from the first column and returning whatever the value is in the second column. And to make a very simple model, we have a normal distribution, which is named as an output, and it's simply taking the mean of whatever the current value is that we needed to use and that's selected here, and a standard deviation of 1. Alternatively, we could use a simple function called Vose SimTable, where we take those values that we want to show, so 5, 10, 15, 20, in sequential simulations, as the first input, and as a second input, the value that we might want to use when we're not running a simulation. Because when we're not running a simulation, we still want to see how the model behaves. So when not running a simulation, the Vose SimTable function is returning the value 20 in cell F7. But when running multiple simulations, it will run through the first value 5, then 10, then 15, then 20 for each of the simulation runs. And again, we're using a Vose normal function where we're pulling in the selected mean value for the normal and a standard deviation of 1. So these are two equivalent ways of running multiple simulations. I've already run the simulation, as you just saw, so let's just go look into the results. And we'll see that the first one is called normal with VLOOKUP. The second one is called normal with SymTable. A look at the results. Here we have a histogram of the normal with VLOOKUP. And you can see 5, 10, 15, 20. These are the means of those normal distributions with a standard deviation of 1. If I look at the other version, which is where we're saying normal with SymTable, it is exactly the same. So 5, 10, 15, 20. I can make an easy comparison using the results here. I can look at a new horizontal tab. Now you can see the two results side by side. You can see they're exactly the same. There are a couple of tricks in running multiple simulations. In the settings, to ensure that each simulation run is using exactly the same random number values for all of the samples or all of the distributions that are in common, what we would do is we would select a manual random number generator seed. We pick a seed value 1 to whatever you want, and make sure that multiple simulations are all using the same seed value. This will mean that every sample that is taken within a distribution or any other random number generating functions within ModelRisk would always be generating exactly the same scenarios sample by sample, so you to make an immediate exact comparison.